And welcome back to the second leg of the doubleheader. Of course, if you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was earlier with Mike Vaccaro, longtime sports writer for the New York Post. Interesting look into his career, his journey to the Post, where he's been since 2002. Before that, of course, last night, volume 27 of The Best of the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite with Ron Caraba, who worked in Engine 225, as well as Ladder 107. And from that, we go to this episode. Welcome back, episode 214 of the Mike and Raven podcast. Like I said, second leg of the doubleheader. I've never interviewed a U.S. Marshal before. I know guys who started out with the police department, of course, in New York City, in my case, given that I interview a lot of NYPD guys. They went to the Marshals later, but as far as somebody that took a different route and was a Marshal for most of his lengthy career, that's a first for us tonight with my next guest, who certainly had an inside track at the federal level of law enforcement. He's a Navy veteran, an 8-year tenure in the Navy, to be exact, reserve duty and active duty as well. He was a member of the Amphibious Assault Force, which we'll discuss what that is tonight. And that served as a unique stepping stone into first the Secret Service, of which he'd spent 5 years with. And then, of course, as I was saying, the U.S. Marshals, where he was from 1989 until his retirement in 2013, serving in a position later on in his career that is certainly not for the faint of heart. And what position am I referring to? Commander of the Marshals, New York, New Jersey Regional Fugitive Task Force, where if there was a felon to be found between the Empire and Garden States, rest assured the Marshals, led by him, were on the case. And that, for episode 214 of the Mike and Raven podcast, is Mr. Lenny DePaul. Lenny, long time coming to get you on the show. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Mike. I'm doing well, and thank you for that kind introduction. I appreciate that.
I appreciate having you. So first question is always an easy one. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up, believe it or not, in upstate New York. It was, I think there was more horses than people in the town that I grew up with in central New York, Utica, if anyone's ever heard of that place. I lived with my grandmother, and at the age of 17, I decided to join the Navy. I mean, we were kind of on the poor side. Didn't have enough money to go to college, so I didn't know what to do. So I said, you know what? Recruiters were coming into our high school. Navy sounded good to me. So, later on, I learned that Navy stood for never again volunteer yourself. But I learned the hard way.
And for those of you watching in the chat, of course, you can submit a question to Lenny, and I'll try to get to it, as always, at the proper time. So I guess tell me, the Navy during the 1970s, the latter half of the 70s, I mean, Vietnam had just ended. There wasn't any pressing conflict at the time that the Navy would have to involve itself in. What was it like during that era?
Correct. I mean, the war was over. The evacuation was done. The Cold War was up and running, but I was in during peacetime. We played a lot of war games. I spent a year and a half in the Far East. I was in the 7th Fleet in San Diego. So it was kind of quiet. I mean, I was attached to an amphibious assault group, which is better known as the Gator Navy. So I hung around a bunch of crazy Marine recons and underwater demolition guys, better known as Navy SEALs nowadays. We played board games. I was on ships that were landing ship docks where we would pull into 200-300 men, and you've probably seen where these tailgates come down in the back of these big boats, and people come running out and onto the beach and do their thing. So, I did that for about 5 years, active duty, and then I spent 3 years inactive in the reserves as well. But it was great. I always say I learned it all in the Navy, and I did. I mean, I was a young kid. I lived with my grandmother. Sadly, she died in my arms at a young age, and I had no direction. I said, you know what, join the military. My dad actually, I was in touch with him afterward, and I didn't know what to do. When I left the Navy, I was walking down a pier in San Diego, had my sea bag on my shoulder, and 5 years of active duty. And I turned around and I said, well, that was fun. Now what? So I had no direction, didn't know where I was going to end up.
And that took you, of course, after those 8 years in the Navy between active and reserve duty to
Right.
The Secret Service initially in 1984. So tell me, I mean, again, Secret Service is coming off a notable period in its history. They had the attempted assassination of Reagan just a few years prior, and you're coming into the agency where after any major event, there's always a retooling of the process, a retooling of just how they handle things. But tell me about the training just to get into the Secret Service in the first place.
Well, that's putting it mildly. And I came on board in late in 1984, and the attempted assassination was prior to that. So our academy, I mean, I can tell you exactly what happened on that crazy day that Hinckley tried to assassinate President Reagan, from what went wrong and what went right, which was not a lot. And as far as strategies and tactically sound agents that were trying to protect the president and get him out of there, it was a nightmare. But I had, I mean, let's go back a little bit. When I left the Navy, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I ended up down in the state of Maryland. I was actually working for a construction company, and I ran into a guy by the name of Danny Cecere. He was an instructor, self-defense instructor at the Secret Service Academy. And we had a conversation. I was putting windows and a roof on his house. And he says, you know, you got a great military background. How about the Secret Service? How's that sound to you? I said, what is that? I had no idea. And he said, well, I said, look, Danny, I'm an uneducated military guy. But at the time, the uniform division of the Secret Service, I did not need a degree to apply, which I did. Fast forward, I'll never forget it. About a year and a half later, I got a call on a Thursday from the recruiter, and she said to me, I got good news and I got bad news. And I said, okay, tell me. She says, well, the good news is you got the job. The bad news is you start Monday. And I remember it like this. I was on my phone and I said, hold on. Okay, I'm good. I was like, next thing I know, I was at Beltsville, Maryland at the Secret Service Academy. And then I headed down to the Glencoe, Georgia, where the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center is for most federal agencies. But yeah, 1984, it was a tough year. I mean, when I went through the academy, got back to Beltsville, the Secret Service Academy, that whole incident with the attempted assassination on the president. And I spent my first 2.5 years at the White House. And it was, here I am from upstate New York. I was in a one-horse town. And next thing I know, I'm in the West Wing of the White House. And I was like, and forget about politics. I couldn't even tell you what a Democratic or Republican Party was. I was just having fun. And again, the training was excellent training. Everybody was tactically sound. We had a saying with the Secret Service: we don't get paid for what we do. We get paid for what could happen. And rightfully so. I remember having a couple of jumpers coming over to South Fence and actually on the North grounds as well. But it was an interesting almost 3 years at the White House with President Reagan.
Well, tell me about, because I always like to ask this anytime I'm talking with my cops or with my firemen at the local level. There's always the senior cop or the senior fireman that you gravitate to that teaches you things both directly and indirectly. You can learn by observation. You can learn through conversation. Was there a secret agent or multiple, a senior agent, I should say, or multiple senior agents that you would say specifically helped your career?
There were special agents. Ray Shattuck was the SAC. He was a special agent in charge of Reagan's detail. Timmy McCarthy, Danny McCarthy, Danny Spriggs, who actually played for the Cowboys. I looked up to these guys. I actually played on the basketball team for the Secret Service. And Danny Spriggs, I don't know if you recall, when the incident went down, the McCarthy brothers, Timmy sadly took a round in the stomach, and then Danny Spriggs, he's actually the one standing over Hinckley, who's on the ground. And he's got his gun up in the air like this. And I mean, those were guys when I came on. I don't want to say they were legends, but you obviously heard about them, especially going through the academy and things that they didn't do right or should have. But if you recall that whole incident when the president took off, I mean, he didn't know. Jack Parr threw him in the backseat of that limo and landed on top of him. And he thought he broke his ribs, the president. So he sat up and then he was spitting up blood. And they zigged when they should have zagged. The radio communications were so hectic. The president made a right, went to GW Hospital, and everybody else went left back to the White House. They didn't know where the president was for like 7 minutes, which is unheard of in our world. But they radioed ahead to the hospital and said, we're coming in with the president. And, the rest of the story. I don't want to bore your folks, but it was, the way that whole thing went down in the matter of seconds that Hinckley got off all those rounds from that handgun, utilizing 22 caliber bullets that were mercury loaded tips that exploded on impact. President Reagan took a ricochet round. It actually hit the door first. Thank God it exploded and then lodged under his left arm. He got lucky. I mean, he was within, not even an inch or less from his heart. So, what was his line when he was going into surgery and he looked up and he says, I hope you guys are all Republicans. Funny guy.
Yeah, and he ended up living another 20 years after that. He died at the ripe old age of 93.
I'd say he had an aura about him, whether it was Margaret Thatcher at the time, Gandhi, Gorbachev, it didn't matter. I mean, he just glowed when he walked into a room. And I always used to put in for overtime because when the head of state would come into town, they would conduct their business in the morning and talk about how they're going to, whatever they needed to do. And then at night, they would have a state dinner, and President Reagan used to invite everybody from Hollywood. So, I mean, back in those days, there was one person though, and I'll see if you can guess this, Mike. There was one person that had a family badge, a family pass to get into the White House. Carte blanche, could go wherever. I don't want to say he or she, but wherever the person wanted to go, they could go. And I was a big fan personally, and I'm wondering if you can guess who that one person was.
Can I get a hint?
Out of all, well, a singer.
A singer.
And he had blue eyes.
Blue eyes. Oh my God, there's so many of them.
That's all I'm going to tell you.
Man, I have to look that up. I had carte blanche.
Well, you're a New York guy, so if you did it my way.
Sinatra, of course.
Frank Sinatra. There you go. He was a big fan of the First Lady, Nancy Reagan's, and yeah, he used to come and go as he pleased. But anyways, it was just it was an interesting almost 3 years I spent there, and then I went over to foreign missions and protected the foreign embassies, chancelleries, and whatnot around the D.C. area. And then one day I got a call. Two of my former colleagues decided to go over to the U.S. Marshal Service. And, I could have fun at a funeral, Mike. That's just how I am. I was enjoying just doing all protection. I was getting a degree, wanted to become an 1811, which is a criminal investigator within the government. So I was working my way up the ladder. And I got in a conversation with these two guys. I said, you got to come over to the U.S. Marshals. They're chasing fugitives. And I was like, what's a U.S. Marshal? Are they riding horses? I had no idea what they did as well. So, it was explained to me. And I took at that point, you had to take a test and just get interviewed because I was already in the government. And then I took a lateral transfer. And then my first stop was in Brooklyn, New York. And that's when we hit the ground running, and I spent the next 3 decades in the fugitive world chasing terrorists, murderers, and rapists across the globe. So that was an exciting 26 years.
As we'll talk about as we go along.
We'll get there, yeah.
Of course, we'll talk about that as we go on what will be this very interesting episode 214 with retired U.S. Marshal Lenny DePaul. Shout out to our friends tuning in tonight. Joe Maliga, retired correctional officer. Also, Garrett Lingler, retired FDNY firefighter. And Maui Swift, as well as David DeConchich. I hope I'm saying that right. He says, Lenny, I love the Manhunter show. All the agents were great on that show. And he says, Roxy, Pep, Vinny, etc. Are they all retired?
Roxy's still working. Pepper's just retired from the Newark Police Department, and Vinny is retired as well. Vinny Senzamichi. He was a New York State parole officer. But Roxanne, I think she's a sergeant now. I actually just spoke to her about 3 weeks ago. She's doing great. But it was a fun show. I mean, we shot 64 episodes, and it sounded corny at first, but they said, hey, look, because I was busy, and again, I don't want to fast forward on you, Mike, but it was post 9/11. This task force was stood up in May of 2002. Congress felt it necessary to look in our own backyards. The FBI was focusing on domestic terrorism, and rightfully so after 9/11. But they wanted to establish permanent fugitive task forces within the U.S. Marshal Service. So, I was one of the lucky chosen ones as a supervisor from, or as they say, an original plank owner in May of 2002. And then we started out small, 3 offices, New York and New Jersey, I think we had 30 investigators from 29 different agencies. When I left, and today they've got 350 full-time investigators from over 90 different federal, state, and local agencies. And the specific language, Mike, from Congress was to target the most dangerous, violent felony fugitives across the globe: terrorists, murderers, rapists, arsonists, gun runners, drug runners, the worst of the worst. So every one of these arrests we were making were averaging anywhere from 5 to 8 prior arrests. These were bad people. And my task force, which was the flagship and the model for the rest of the country, they now have 8 regional fugitive task forces throughout the country. But we were averaging anywhere from 100 to 110 arrests a week, just in my region alone, of violent people. I mean, the statistics are staggering. So anyways, fast forward, the Manhunters Fugitive Task Force show, which aired on A&E for 3 seasons, 64 episodes, I think we shot. I had no time for that. And they had approached me and said, hey, look, these 2 producers are trying to get a hold of you. They want to do a show. And I said, yeah, okay. Hey, it went on and on. Finally, I called my public affairs in D.C. and they said, well, entertain the request, see what they want. After all, we are a new federally funded task force. What a great way to show the American people how some of their tax dollars are being spent. So I said, I said to the fellow in public affairs, Don High, I said, Don, I don't have time. I'm a little busy. We've got a lot going on here. And well, anyways, apparently I didn't count because 3 seasons later, and I never went home in I don't know how many years. It was crazy. But yeah, thank you for that question. And Roxy's still going at it. Michi, if you remember her, she's still working as well. And a few of the others are still doing their thing.
Quick question, because I just saw him, because years ago, like in 1993, 1994, they did an episode of Cops on the U.S. Marshals, and one of the arrests is in New York City. Did you work with Bobby Fagan?
I know Bobby Fagan well. We came up together. Sadly, he passed away.
Wow.
Yeah, a few years ago. Yeah, but Bobby and I kind of came on the job together. And in fact, we worked on this regional fugitive task force together. He was actually my boss at one point.
Wow, because he's in that episode leading a task force, and it's him, obviously his marshals, and a New York City Housing Authority police officer.
Right.
This is before the merger of the NYPD into housing. And they go and they get a woman that's wanted on murder charges stemming from 1979.
Right.
So that's the thing about you guys. You guys have memories of elephants. It doesn't matter if the crime was committed in 1962, 1992, 2022. You have a file, you find where they are, you never, ever give up.
That's true. I mean, that warrant's never going to go away. And I always say you can run, but you can't hide. And when you run, you only go to jail tired.
Exactly. And during that time when you came in, it's interesting because I literally just had him on the show. He wasn't there long because by the time you got there, he retired a year later. Howard Safer came in 1978. And, he left in 1990. But again, he really prioritized giving you guys a lot of rope to work with. He knew federal law enforcement, obviously having been with the DEA previously. And so having him there as a boss, he was running, I think he was the associate director of operations at that time. Having his support must have been instrumental.
It was a home run when he came on board. Like you said, he was a cop's cop. I mean, Howard, Director Safer, he was all for. I mean, the Marshal Service, and not to get off on a tangent here, but they do such a variety of law enforcement. It's the oldest federal law enforcement agency in this country. Not a lot of people realize that. 1789, George Washington appointed the first 13 U.S. Marshals. And, they were kind of doing the same duties back then, but they were riding horses as we do now. So, yeah, it's the oldest federal law enforcement agency in this country. It's such a storied agency. And, you mentioned about warrants and things that don't, the fugitive division, it's called the Investigative Operations Division. That's one part of it. We also have the Witness Protection Program, the Asset Seizure Program, the Judicial Protection Program. They're protecting all 7 Supreme Court justices right now, as of recent. So, they do a lot of work at the Gangs Task Forces, Missing Children Task Forces, the Sex Offender Branch, the Adam Walsh Act that was stood up thanks to John Walsh. He was a huge proponent of that, and that comes with a lot of a whole lot of resources and state-of-the-art equipment, manpower, and whatnot. So, yeah, the agency does a lot, and I always kid around and say we're the redheaded stepchild in the Department of Justice because you got the FBI, DEA, ATF, and then the U.S. Marshals, and we run around with about 4,000 actual deputy U.S. Marshals. The FBI, I think, has 30,000. I don't know, but it's great.
Like that.
Yeah.
And, working in a place like New York City during that time, especially Brooklyn, when this is right in the middle of the crack wars, there are so many, as you said, violent people on the street. But it's prime real estate in New York for both criminals and law enforcement alike. The FBI's New York office is perhaps its most notable office. You have, of course, the ATF. You have the NYPD, who's not your average local police department. This is a police department that has a budget, I should say, that's greater than police departments. You combine 30 of them and it wouldn't add up to the NYPD's budget. So having to coordinate with them, and like I said, it's pre-merger. You got a criminal on the loose. He might go in the transit system. You got to talk to the transit police. He might live in a NYCHA development. You got to talk to the housing police. I imagine coordination had to be a hell of a lot more difficult back then.
It was. And you hear people talk that are my age or maybe even a little older that nobody shared that information. It wasn't, when these task forces were stood up, especially ours, at that point we were sharing information at the speed of the internet. But let's go back to 9/11. I was read on to a military intelligence team after 9/11. The military was now in the manhunting business. So the Department of Justice had reached out for our agency, and I got a call one day and said, you need to come down to Washington. And of course, me being me, for what? What do I need to? Don't ask questions. You need to get down here. Long story short, I was read on to to an intel group, and the obvious, looking at for high value targets and whatnot. And not to get into too much detail, but I would sit in a room with all the intelligence folks, DIA, CIA, NSA, all the brainiacs, and there I am, the village idiot, and they'd go around the room and share information. They all had the answers. I'm sitting back and I'm going, wait a minute, you've got X, Y, and Z, you've got A, B, C, but you guys aren't talking. I mean, the answers are right here in the room, and they would look at me like I had three heads, and it was like, oh, okay, all right, yeah, maybe, all right, yeah. And then, of course, they would execute what we thought they should have, and we would find people, around the globe. But anyways, it was interesting you say that, because it was kind of obvious. I mean, agencies back then, some of them just can't wait to run to the microphone to announce the arrest of. There's a particular agency out there that hasn't found a microphone they haven't liked yet. So it's like, and sadly it still exists sometimes, but we don't care. I don't know if you remember the movie U.S. Marshal with Tommy Lee Jones
and Robert Downey Jr.
Well, no, that was the first. I'm talking about with Harrison Ford and Tommy
that one. I know both.
The original.
Yep.
Right, The Fugitive. So if you recall the scene where he's chasing Harrison Ford and they get in a tunnel and it's water and he's getting ready to jump, out of this tunnel into the water down below. And Harrison Ford has this 20-minute dialogue about how he's innocent. He's going on and on and on. I didn't kill my wife. And Tommy Lee Jones has him at gunpoint. And finally, after Harrison gets done talking, Tommy looks at him and says, I don't care. That's us. We don't care what you did. We just bring you back to the bar of justice and go on to the next 50 cases. So,
right. It's kind of, and it's not catch and release, that's for sure, which is kind of what's going on now. It's kind of, and it's not whack-a-mole either, because that's not a suitable comparison. I think it's kind of like checking things off a list. It's kind of like, and again, this is going to sound funny. You go to the grocery store, you know what you got to get. Okay, I need bread, check. I need milk, check. Same thing. It's criminals, obviously. All right, we got this guy on murder. We got this guy on racketeering. Check, on to the next one. It's not personal. It's just business.
That's all it is. And I used to laugh because I'd show up at Mom's door at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they would yell at me. Time out. I didn't wake up this morning and say I want to go to 123 Main Street to try to find your son who just killed 3 people. I'm sorry. That's not my problem. I mean, unfortunately, and by the time we had a conversation, I was an agent where I like to talk to people. So we would have a conversation. Next thing you know, I'm having a cup of coffee at Mom's table and saying, look, tell me, if you knew where your son was, would you tell me? And that would be my first question. I didn't bother chatting for half an hour and trying to pull information. Simple stuff. And most of the time, they would say no. And that told you 2 things. One, she knows where he is. And number 2, we now had to take a hard look at Mom and see what kind of, how she was communicating and whatnot. And again, I don't want to, I always say I like to talk about our trade craft, not teach it. But technology, as you know, is out there. Digital footprints are important. There's a whole lot that goes on in the manhunting world nowadays that we didn't have, eons ago when I first came on. But I've seen it all evolve, and it's changing as we speak. So.
Oh, of course, it's still evolving to this day, to this very second as we sit here talking tonight. Lenny DePaul is our guest. He is a retired U.S. Marshal, former member of the Secret Service as well. Happy to have him here tonight on the Mike New Haven podcast. Now, there's 2 forms of terrorism as far as I'm concerned. You mentioned it, so we'll touch on it, especially during the 90s. Narco-terrorism, because these guys are basically terrorists. They're terrorizing their communities. They're killing people to protect their trade, their money, and also political terrorism. And you had as a year after you came into the Marshals, in Manhattan, Rabbi Kahane is murdered during one of his sermons. 3 years later, you had the World Trade Center bombing, and bin Laden was actually indicted for financing that bombing in a New York court, I believe, in the summer of 1998. So you can't find him quite yet. But as far as his associates who are in the area, remember, the bombers of the World Trade Center were in Jersey City right before they did it. Tell me about fighting terrorism even then, even before 9/11.
It was, well, whether it's terrorist or homicide suspects or whatever. I mean, the methodologies and things that we use as fugitive investigators, you got that initial manhunt going on, but you also have a fugitive investigation that's going on behind the scenes. So as you're putting that puzzle together and connecting the dots, there's a lot of sources out there, people that have come on board. I say Team USA that cooperate. I mean, the streets talk, reward money's out there. Domestically or international, it doesn't matter. We have a lot of how do I put this without giving up the candy store? We have a lot of friends around the globe that like to have conversations, and I'm talking about daily and sometimes weekly conversations. So we have an international branch as well that works very good. And there's a fellow by the name of Mike Hughes, who's now the director of Interpol. Interpol's got 186 countries under them. So we have that reach. It's still, you talk about the long arm of the law, whether it's terrorism or not, Mike. It doesn't, it's tougher, let's put it this way, because we're chasing a ghost at one point. But once we latch on to somebody and identify a suspect, it really is only a matter of time. I mean, I've chased fugitives for years, don't get me wrong. And again, I go back to when they were using calling cards and beepers and, pagers. And then this thing called a cell phone showed up, and, it was the size of a brick. I think had one, the whole unit had one. But, as technology evolved, our technical operations group, our electronic surveillance units, our financial surveillance units, these men and women are way ahead of the curve on this stuff. We're still training the military on a lot of this technology. So we were there from Jump Street, and we'd utilize that within the investigation. And people are going to talk. When people go off the grid, they go dark. I don't care who it is. You're looking at everything. We call it who's who in the zoo. You're turning their trusted circle of friends upside down, whether it's bin Laden's carrier, who thankfully jumped on a cell phone and they were able to intercept that conversation and got onto him, or El Chapo Guzman. And not to get into detail about him because there's things ongoing, but, the U.S. Marshals, if there's a fugitive out there, if it's a highlighted case, if it's the Boston Bombers, the D.C. Snipers, whatever, we're there. I mean, we're the premier agency in the Department of Justice in finding people. And again, I'm not beating my own chest, Mike, but we're pretty good at what we do. I couldn't do a drug case. I'm not a DEA agent. I couldn't do a bank robbery case. I'm not an FBI agent. But when it comes to finding human beings, and you do it every day, weekends, holidays, you become pretty good at it. So, the men and women that are downrange doing what I call God's work every day, they're way ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff. But to answer your question, whether it's terrorist or whoever, we know how to put that puzzle together and connect those dots and hopefully, make that arrest without anybody else getting hurt or, God forbid, killed.
And what's interesting about the Marshals operation is that there's really few places in the world that you can't go. I mean, think about it. The NYPD, who I mentioned earlier, their jurisdiction is New York City. Do they have detectives that are stationed overseas? Yeah, but they're limited in what they can do. You guys, that's not the case. You can go anywhere at any time. Doesn't matter if it's Malaysia, Italy, Cuba, wherever there's a suspect to be found. And if he or she has ties back to the own country, the United States, off you go. By the grace of God, go you guys.
Right on the money with that, Mike. In fact, my credentials with the Secret Service was a specific language on the credential: protection of the president, blah, 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 blah. The U.S. Marshals credentials read to enforce all laws of the United States of America. Only credential that reads that. You talk about jumping on airplanes. The reason our task forces were stood up and we work so well with our state and local partners is because when they come on board, I had 20, so they're still there, 26 detectives, 3 sergeants, and a lieutenant, NYPD. And again, 350 full-time. But just from the NYPD, they're all deputized U.S. Marshals. They have the same authority that I have for 2 years until we re-up their credentials. But, they could jump on planes. There's no barriers. There's no more state lines. And it makes life a lot easier, to track somebody, especially if somebody is jumping on, state lines and whatnot. And, years ago, you used to have to call where you thought maybe the fugitive ended up in Louisiana, and you get somebody on the phone. And, by the time you got off the phone, the fugitive was in the next state. But now we just all work together. These task forces were a home run back in post 9/11. So some good things did come out of the unfortunate, the whole 9/11 thing. But yeah, no, I think being deputized U.S. Marshals as a state and local, and of course, the U.S. Marshals, jurisdiction boundaries, there isn't any.
And I think what makes you guys work so well with your local partners, and tell me if you agree with this, is that, listen, I'm not knocking the FBI, but the FBI has the tendency.
I will, if you'd like.
We'll refrain. And I have guys who have done that on this show, and I understand where they're coming from because the FBI, they have the tendency to be very pushy in some of these cases. And sometimes they don't play nice in the sandbox with local police departments. And for some of the NYPD guys we've had on the show, there's certainly no love lost there from the older era in the 90s and even into the early 2000s. But you guys, again, as I said earlier, you're just about doing the job. And it's refreshing for these local departments that feel that sometimes, listen, you know the interpretations they have of federal law enforcement. So when they see you guys, like I said, it's a breath of fresh air, and you guys are able to work together, simpatico, lockstep.
We're known as cops, Mike. You're absolutely right. We're not stuffed suits. I mean, when we stood this task force up, stood this task force up, the hardest thing for me to do was to go into a state or a local agency and say, "Hi, I work for the government. I'm here to help." It was like, but once we established, and we had ad hoc task forces throughout the years. I was on the NYPD ad hoc task force in the 90s. We worked well with the counties in Long Island and whatnot, even in New Jersey. So they knew who we were. I mean, we're known as cops. We're street cops, and they appreciate that. We're not there to step on toes and whatnot. But once we finally convinced even the bigger departments, NYPD, Commissioner Kelly at the time, I'll let you in on a little secret. I know that he was in love, and in fact, today they're still in love with this task force, the Regional Fugitive Task Force. But they've pulled NYPD off of the bank robbery task forces, strike forces, drug task forces. It's because they're so combative. I mean, they go at it, and it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. I mean, it's all about, in my world, keeping a community a safe place for mom and their kids to go to school and whatnot. And, that's what it's all about to me. When you arrest a homicide suspect, you just save somebody else's life, and they don't even know it, but who cares? I mean, we just move on and do our job. But, the bigger departments, even the small departments who were a little reluctant to come on board our task force, I would tell them, look, Chief, I'm not only taking one of your police or your detectives, I'm giving you 350 people, manpower, equipment, money, state-of-the-art stuff. I mean, and by the time I walked out the door, he wanted to give me 5 guys. But, it sold itself because, yeah, you're right. Again, I don't want to beat our own chest, but we're well liked. I mean, we're well liked in the world of policing, and even though and again, I don't talk politics, but it's a tough climate out there for law enforcement, and I always like to talk positive about all law enforcement. It's a tough job. So
right,
yeah.
And with Commissioner Kelly, he had to be very easy to work with because he had the federal experience too. He ran customs for a while, did a great job of customs. I think he was the director of Interpol and helped establish a task force in Haiti while he was the director of Interpol in the mid-90s.
He was great. I didn't, he loved, like I said, he loved our task force. He kind of rolled out the red carpet for me, whatever you need. But you know what it is? You're successful when you're arresting, 2 cops were killed, Timchenko and oh God forbid, I forget. Anyways, we ended up
auxiliary cops, right?
I'm sorry.
Was it the auxiliary cops in 07?
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
And, we found those guys in Pennsylvania. They were running through the woods. And, and again, I go on and on about cases. But, once you, I don't want to say prove yourself, but once they realize, and I used to tell the chiefs of police, commissioners, hey, guys, we just arrested this guy who just burnt a trailer down with 8 kids in it and killed them all. I don't care if you invite me to your press conference, but you need to do one because you guys look like, superstars right now to the families. There's closure, blah, 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 blah. And they would invite me. I would never go. That's not what we were about. It was just get the job done. And again, we were so busy post 9/11. I don't remember, from 2000, May of 2002 till I retired. It just was a blur to me. And I've got my daughter who reminds me all the time. So, yeah.
And it must have been added motivation, obviously, even if you didn't know anybody. I'm not sure if you did on the first responder side who was killed that day, just to look anywhere in the city and not see those 2 towers anymore. Anytime you were feeling down, that had to be the added motivation needed to get right back on track and keep doing that job.
I brought my daughter up. She was born September 7th, 2001, 4 days before 9/11. So I was actually home on vacation. I watched the Giants get beat by the Denver Broncos on Monday night. I had baby duty, and then I slept in, and then my wife was abruptly waking me up around 9 o'clock crying. I thought something happened to our daughter, and she said a plane just ran into the World Trade Center. I said, what are you waking me up for? I was like, okay. And then she flipped the television on just in time to see the second plane, and my pager was going off, my house phone was going off. And like I said, I kissed my daughter on her forehead and said, I'll see you later. And I apologized for bringing her into this crazy world, true story. And I was gone. I mean, I was gone for years. I was in Afghanistan with a couple of different units doing our thing. I was in DC all the time. So, yeah, it was really, it was something, but you're right. You talk about a motivational, anything, you think about that. And I remember leaving my house, I had to gas up my government Tahoe that I had. My lights and sirens were going. I was heading into the city and I had no gas. So I pull over in Long Island where I live and I'm getting gas. There were people cheering me saying, go get those. And I was like, who are they talking? They were talking to me. And I guess they realized, but the camaraderie, the people that came together, the closeness. I mean, God, I wish we had that nowadays, Mike.
Yeah. No, you're not
I don't wish we had a 9/11. I wish we had,
Well, a lot of people say they wish they had a 9/12.
Well, okay.
When you woke up the next morning and you had that sort of camaraderie, as many people allude to.
Well put. Yep.
Yeah. Through the years. And like I said, federal law enforcement, as I've mentioned on previous shows, they took their hits that day too, because Lenny Hatton from the FBI, he did not make it that day. Craig Miller from the Secret Service, another one, he didn't make it that day. His family didn't even know he was in New York. He took a last-second detail, and I think he had previous experience as an Army medic. He went to help, and he did not return.
Sad.
Yeah. So, it definitely goes without saying that these heroes, 21 years later, their legacies live on, and there's added motivation to carry on their legacy and make sure they're not forgotten by not only obviously honoring them, but by doing the good work that guys like you and your task force were doing.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, there were many and people that I know, friends and friends of friends, and the stories that were being told, and the near misses and who didn't go to work that day. And it's just, it seems like it was yesterday. And even though we're 21 years later, it's just, it's heartbreaking. I was out to dinner, excuse me, at a restaurant in New York with some friends. And this one woman we were with, her boyfriend was killed in the South Tower. They were engaged. And, I was with her and I was just, I can't imagine just the heart-wrenching, not being able to get a hold of them. She tells the story, and it's just, it's endless. And I know there's a lot of stories out there, but you're right. It is not only motivation. It's like, when I got read onto that military intelligence team, like everyone else I was with, let's go to work. We didn't want to sleep. We just wanted to hit the ground running and keep going.
And during that era, I mean, listen, you guys had support beforehand, but whatever barriers might have existed came right off. From 024, we talked earlier about silver linings, I should say. I imagine the simple response from those above you was just, go, say less, go, do it.
Whatever you need. Yeah. It was not only a blank check, it was whatever you needed, just get the job done. Get her done, my boss used to say. Get her done.
So, let me say about your career, of course, rising through the ranks. Sometimes it's a gradual process. Sometimes people get on the job and from day one, they want to be a lieutenant someday, or on the federal side, they want to be an ASAC someday. How is that process like for you? Was it gradual? Were you always aiming for it?
Within the Marshal Service, like I said, there's a variety of law enforcement that goes on with all these divisions. You have to spend a couple of weeks as a young deputy U.S. Marshal to get to know the job. I did that. I was in WITSEC, the Witness Protection Program, for 2 weeks. I was in asset seizure. So you bounced around. I was very lucky. I was about maybe a year and a half. You would spend, several years working courts and transporting prisoners. I did it for about a year and a half, and I got kind of on a fluke, went into the warrant squad in Brooklyn, and I never, ever left. And that's unheard of in these districts. There's 94 districts around the country now with the regional task forces. Of course, that didn't exist back then. But I was in the Brooklyn warrant squad is where I started, and I was one of the fortunate. I couldn't tell you really any other part of the Marshal Service, because all I did was work fugitive investigations my entire career. But when they stood up, and like I said, post 9/11, May of 2002, they stood up these permanent task forces. The New York, New Jersey Regional Fugitive Task Force was the flagship. I was asked to come in as a supervisor right from Jump Street. So I said, absolutely. And as myself and another guy from New Jersey, we kind of ran it. And then he moved on, and the task force was growing. Los Angeles stood up theirs. They were the number 2 task force. Chicago, D.C., Florida, Caribbean, Gulf Coast. So they were springing up all over the place. And as they were climbing, so was I. I was like, I went from supervisor to deputy commander and then commander. in 2006, I believe, or 7. And I was the commander for several years of this largest fugitive task force of its kind in the world, and still is today.
And in being in a position of authority, as I've mentioned before with my fire department and police department friends, it's not just your safety you have to look out for. Now it's those that are under you. And they're like your kids, because the same way you would never want your daughter to be harmed in any way or shape or form, you don't want these guys and gals working under you to be harmed. Even if they're able to go home, you don't want them to get dinged up in the first place. So tell me about battling through those sleepless nights and making sure that you have the proper tactics in place.
You talk about panic attacks and nightmares. I was a huge proponent of training, Mike. We had a training facility which was afforded a ton of money after 9/11. The Federal Air Marshals have a beautiful place down in Atlantic City. And they had like three $7 million gorgeous indoor ranges, outdoor ranges, shoot houses. So we kind of moved in on their territory. And I, like I said, I made it mandatory, especially in our world. I mean, you give credit to obviously police departments and the folks in uniform they're doing great work. But people that are working fugitive task forces, we're knocking doors down for a living. We're every morning going after felons. I mean, these people, they don't want to go back to jail. So you have to be tactically sound. And, I can't tell you the times that I was either waking up at 4 o'clock or driving in and my phone would go off, or way back when, what the Blackberries would we have? I don't remember anymore. But, hey, we just got into a shooting in Newark. And my first question was, are we okay? Is everybody okay? Yeah, the bad guy might have took a round, but we're going to take him to the hospital. I said, all right, I'm heading your way. It's countless times that I had to, zig when I should have zagged on my way to our office, our headquarters in Manhattan. So, you talk about sleepless nights. I mean, oh my God, not only, wanting everybody to go home safe. And I mean, everybody, even the bad guys. I don't, we weren't about, we're just there to arrest somebody, bring them back to the bar of justice and move on. Yeah. We treated everybody accordingly. If they wanted to pull a gun and get in a shootout, we would shoot back. I mean, that's obvious. But, it was really tough, with some of these fugitives that wanted to play hardball, and our people reacted accordingly. Thank God the shootings that we were involved in, some of our guys had gotten shot. We've had to shoot people. I mean, it comes with the territory. I remember a year before I retired, we set a record that nobody liked setting. We had more task force officers killed in the line of duty, and at the time, our 225-year existence. It was unbelievable. So the director at the time, Stacy Hilton, she was the first female director of the U.S. Marshal Service appointed by the president. She said, here's a ton of money, go train. So we made it a national training effort because we were getting ambushed out there. I mean, it was crazy. And so, since we've thank God the training comes into play. And because when you're dealing with multiple agencies, everybody's trained differently. So when you're in the fugitive business, you want to be tactically sound. You need to know who's on your left, who's on your right. When you're stacked up going through a door after a guy that just committed a triple homicide that don't want to go to jail, and don't you think he'll kill you before or else you better get another job. So you need to be tactically sound and execute that warrant. And like I said, hopefully everybody goes home safe.
And the thing is, it doesn't matter when that knock is coming from you guys. They know it's coming, and they're ready. 10 times out of 10, they're ready, and they're desperate.
Yes, they're sleeping with one eye open, no doubt. Yeah. I had one fugitive that carried a bag with him. It looked like a doctor's bag. He had a rope in it. It was a climber's rope, and he stayed at his girlfriend's house, who was on the 9th floor in this building. And his plan was to wrap the rope around the heater, the heating structure, and then throw the bag out the window and go down the side of the building on a rope. And we had gotten a tip that he was at his mother's house one night. She's on the 13th floor. So what do you think happens, Mike? We hit the door. He does the rope. He throws the bag out. It stopped at the 5th floor. He jumped. He ran out of rope. I ran outside. By the time I got there, there was two imprints from his feet when he landed, about 4 feet deep, and his both of his bones were shoved through his legs. He was bleeding. It was disgusting. But and I remember the next, I still have the newspaper. It said fugitive runs out of rope. It was an article in the newspaper the next morning. But yeah, you talk about it. I could tell you stories forever. But it was a great career. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I love the fugitive business. I love chasing people. Ernest Hemingway put it best: there is no hunting like the hunting of man. And those who have hunted armed men long enough and liked it never cared to do anything else thereafter. It gets in your blood.
I have a question here. You kind of touched on it, but just so we could definitely, or how would I word it? My brains are scrambled. I've been up since 7 o'clock this morning, just so we can define it. Here we have a question from Steven Zaslavsky. He says, did the marshals work on all types of warrants or just federal? Please advise. Thanks.
No, the task forces worked all federal, state, and local warrants. That was the task force concept. So for instance, talking about the NYPD, when their 26 detectives came on board, they all came with cases. There was a specific criteria that had to be met when they brought their cases in. But all the highlighted cases, a good percentage of our cases are state and local cases. I mean, obviously, federal cases, yes, we have them, but we arrested the U.S. Marshal Service, just as throwing a number out there, and I want you to give me a number, Mike. How many arrests do you think the marshals and their task force made last year? Felony arrests, violent people.
Well, there's a lot of violent people.
10,000, 20,000. This is nationwide.
Nationwide. There's so many violent felons on the street. 50,000.
98,000 violent felony fugitives were arrested. And this is a yearly 60, 70, 80, 90,000 every year. So the numbers are staggering. And again, these are violent felonies. So to answer I think it was his question.
It was.
Yeah, we worked federal, state, and local warrants within our task forces.
Just as important as going out there and hunting fugitives and, of course, bringing them to justice, protecting the community and protecting yourselves by extension with proper tactics, as you just talked about, is obviously protecting the base. You guys work in courthouses a lot, too, and you want to make sure these are federal buildings. They're always the target of something for some reason by somebody, no matter what the reason may be. Tell me, without giving up the candy stores you said earlier, courthouse security or just federal building security as a whole and how it's properly done by you guys.
It is, and we have court security officers that are not, deputy U.S. marshals. So there's a whole other crew of people that also protect the federal courthouses. The guys and the women that are at the metal detectors as you enter a federal courthouse, those are court security officers. Most of them are retired U.S. marshals or police officers, but we have, the folks that within the Marshal Service that work prisoner transportation or are in courts, in court every day. I had, I'm sure you remember John Gotti.
Yes.
Okay. Who doesn't know John Gotti? I was the lucky one that had to transport him, Sammy the Bull Gravano, and Frankie Lukasziev, the three of them, when they were on trial in Brooklyn, New York. It was my team that had to transport him every day from MCC, New York, Manhattan, over the Brooklyn Bridge to the Brooklyn Federal Courthouse every day while he was on trial for a couple of reasons. One, who was going to hit him or try to break him out or who was going to try to kill, So we tried to secure. We had, I think, a 3-4 car motorcade every day. So I would show up. And John was a funny guy. I'd show up at MCC at early in the morning. He'd be in his orange jumpsuit. And, hey, Lenny, you got change for 100? John, it's funny. You said that yesterday, So I had no idea. One day I showed up and Sammy Gravano wasn't there. So it was just Frank and Gotti. So John's quiet as a church mouse, which is not like John. John liked to talk. So I don't ask any questions. I do my thing. I get on the elevator going down to 1, and I turn around. I look at John Gotti. Now I'm going to be the funny guy. I looked at John. I said, hey, John, where's Sammy? What is he, a rat now? If looks could have killed Mike, I'd have been dead on the elevator. I had no idea the FBI brought Sammy the Bull Gravano on board Team USA the night before. And the next day, of course, front page of every newspaper in New York City, Sammy Gravano becomes a cooperator. But that was a mess with him. But I remember real quick, when he was done and he was convicted, he was going actually to Merriam, Illinois, federal penitentiary. I had to drive him up to a secured area where our 747 flies in, also known as Con Air, if you ever saw that movie. So I got John in the back, and he's quiet. I mean, obviously he's done. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. And I get him out of the car, and other districts are there loading the plane up. And I said, John, take it easy. We'll load last. We're walking down the tarmac, and he's shaking his chains that he had on his belly chain. He sounded like the ghost of Christmas past. And I'm thinking, okay, he's got to be a little nervous. He knows he's going away for the rest of his life. Gets to the foot of the aircraft. The guy comes out, who I know. Here's John Gotti, health papers, blah, blah, blah. What do I say to the guy? Hey, John, have a nice flight. I mean, I don't even know what I said to him. But as I turn around and walked away, all of a sudden I hear, hey, Lenny. I go, yeah, John, what's the matter? He took about 3 steps up the ladder. He says, you think it's too late to say I'm sorry? That was the last I heard. You know why he was shaking, Mike? He never flew a day in his life. He was scared to death to get on board that airplane. Wow. That's a true story, and I know that for a fact from some family members. So, yeah.
Man, I would have never known that, because the thing about him is that he was a gangster who tried to be almost a politician. Like Gravano talked about this, because he would go out there and say to Gravano in private when they were being wiretapped, at that old lady's apartment they used as their front
stairs, right? Exactly. Yeah.
How is this message going to translate to our public? And Sammy would look at him and say, "Our public? We're gangsters. What do you mean, our public?" So that's how he carried himself. He always carried. I'm not giving him credit, but he acted like a statesman of sorts.
Dapper Don. I mean, that's what he was all about. He'd wear $300 ties. I mean, he was that kind of. He got in a fight one time at MCC, and we were going back over to see the federal judge in Brooklyn. And he said to me, he goes, "You think the judge is going to let me out of 9 South, which was solitary confinement for being in a fight? He was locked down for 24 hours." And I said, "Yeah, John, the judge is in a good mood today. I think he's going to let you out." He goes, "No way." I said, "I'll bet you that tie you got on that he's going to let you out today." Right? Mm-hmm. He goes before the judge, the U.S. attorney says, "Okay, we'll get you back in general population." So I win. Now, I'm kidding around. He goes down to court, whatever. We get ready to take him back, and I get over to MCC. I get out of the car. What do you think's sitting on the back seat of my car?
Tie.
His tie. I had to shove it back in his pocket, but he was true to his word.
Interesting guy. Yeah. There's a funny story just before I move on. I remember I had Bob Costas on this show. And Bob had been visiting New York. I think he was going to a college basketball game, and it's late at night, and they're looking for a restaurant, him and his friends from out of town. So they go down there. I forget the name of the restaurant, but it's an Italian joint. And as they're sitting down getting ready to eat, Gotti walks in. I guess he frequented the restaurant a lot. And, nearly does the rigatoni fall on Costas's lap from the waiter, who drops everything almost to go tend to Gotti, since he's the primary customer there. The guys that are with Costas get scared, and they're like, no. Bob says to them to reassure them, unless you've ever crossed him in some sort of business dealing or are an enemy of his for whatever reason, you're now in the safest spot in New York City. And John Gotti knew who Bob Costas was. He looks at him and says, "Bob, I like your work." And Bob's saying to me, what do I say back? "I like yours too. Nice rub out at Sparks Steakhouse."
Yeah.
So he says, thank you, Mr. Gotti. I appreciate it. And Gotti leans to his people and says, "Bob Costas, sportscaster." And Gotti, Costas leans over to his people and says, "John Gotti, murderer."
That's great. I mean, Gotti was guy. I mean, Howard Beach, Queens, as much as I do. I mean, it was the safest neighborhood in the 5 boroughs. I mean, you didn't, whatever. It is what it is. But they were some vicious people. I mean, we arrested a lot of the Italian, mob folks. It's one guy, Tommy Patera. Tommy, you remember Tommy? What do they call him? The Hitman, Tommy Karate. Yeah. He's the one that was cutting the bodies up and burying them on Staten Island.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him.
And he was using his bathtub at home to cut the bodies up, and him and his girlfriend. I don't want to get into gory details, but you talk about vicious animals. I remember in the cell block, I'm walking by one day, and Tommy's there going to court, and he says, "Lenny," I said, "What time?" He goes, "I missed my bathroom." I mean, just a sick individual. So, but there's been but most of the mob, the mafia, Italian mafia, they never gave us really the fugitives. They never gave us really a hard time at all. Actually, they were, I don't want to say gentlemen, but they do. It's called adult hide and seek with those guys. We'd find them and take care of business.
Now that you bring it up, because this was during the summer of '89, I don't know if you were. I know you got to the Marshalls in '89. I don't know if you were there for this. It was on Staten Island, but I figured they could use whoever they could get. The Faraci manhunt. Were you on that after DEA agent Hatcher got killed?
Yeah. No, I know about it though. I was not. I was. They had just locked up Carmine Persico. Remember
Yep,
him?
the snake.
Yeah, the snake. Correct. That was all right. It was Mike Pizzi. I don't know if you knew him. He was a legend in the Marshal Service, also known as the Chief. Italian guy from Brooklyn. He had a choice: go this way or go that way. So he decided to go that way. But yeah, so Carmine Persico was. I think that was right around that same time. But no, to answer your question, no, I didn't get there in the office until I think it was October of '84. I'm sorry, 89. Yeah.
I think that was right around the time that it happened. And the mob found Faraci first. I remember guys telling me from the NYPD side and the emergency service, they were looking for him too because they were helping the DEA out. But it was kind of a case of street justice because they found Faraci and his friend shot dead.
Yes, correct. Yeah. I see you were talking to Gentleman Jack Cambria.
Yes. Yeah. He's a friend of mine.
He was my neighbor in Brooklyn. I lived next door to Jack. Yeah. He was with Truck 8, I think, at the time, right?
6, I believe.
6, was it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 6. Okay. Yeah. Gentleman Jack, we used to call him.
Yeah. He was the guest for my hostage negotiation miniseries and, of course, a legendary emergency service cop.
Oh, he's a legend is right. What a great guy. Yep.
Great guy. Good man, Jack. So I guess I'll ask you, 2013, you decided to pull the pin, so to speak. You'd had a lengthy career across the Secret Service, across the Marshals, 29 years in total. I imagine you just felt, okay, like many guys feel when they have that many years in, I accomplished everything I wanted to do. But still, it's so hard to leave because you love it. When was the moment you said to yourself or started to say to yourself, I think it's time to start winding down?
Well, I mean, I did love it. I always say I don't miss the circus. I miss the clowns. It was a great job, but you're wrong in what you just said. They kick us out at 57. It's mandatory retirement. I wasn't 57. I left a little early. I'll tell you why. I was maxed out money wise in New York. I was actually paying the government money to go to work. They wanted to bring me down to Washington in an executive position, and I did not want to go down to the nation's capital again. And I got offered a job on television to bring back America's Most Wanted, John Walsh's old show, with a very good producer. I don't want to throw names around, but anyhow, so I said, you know what? I don't want to go to D.C. I'm almost ready to max out. They're going to kick us out at 57, kick me out at 57. I'm paying the government to go to work. I really don't want to leave, but I ended up packing it in the end of 2013. Correct. So, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it was, I was going 100 miles an hour, as you can imagine, for 100 years. I spent 34 and a half years total in the government. They owned me for a long time. But the task force, I mean, we hit the ground running in May of 2002. And like I said, until my retirement party, I didn't stop. My phone would go off 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. But you know something, when you put the brakes on and you retire, I was looking at my phone hoping it would ring. I would tell people to call me at 2 a.m. just to say hello. I mean, you talk about PTSD. I mean, I was going nuts. And, you think about a lot of things. The things that went on in the fugitive business and the gunfights we were in and and you're kind of like, all right, I got out of there with no holes in me, a couple of scars here and there, but a lot of great stories. We did great work. We put people behind bars that needed to go there. And the communities are a safer place. And, you pass the baton and the task force is still up and running. Ed McMahon's the commander now. He was a supervisor with me when I was there. And, they come and go. So they're still doing their thing. And I keep my finger on the pulse and throw in my 2 cents when they ask me. And that's it. But you never, like I said earlier, it gets in your blood. You can never let go.
Right. Once a lawman, always a lawman.
Yes.
Until the very end. One more question before I get to the rapid fire, because I was reading this about you when I was doing my research originally. You're into fashion now. You're giving Ralph Lauren a run for his money there. So tell me about that. You have your own fashion line.
Here's the deal with that, and I'm glad you brought it up. My wife, who's in the fashion business, went to FIT, whatnot. It's been in women's shoes forever. She said to me when COVID kicked off, they shut her office down in Manhattan, and she was home. She says, you know what? Instead of killing each other, why don't we stand up or develop a tactical clothing line? And I said, honey, I'm retired. She said, well, perfect opportunity. There's a couple of big companies out there, but, we could be a small business. And So 2 years later, we stood up a company. It's called O Dark 30. We've got a website, and if you'll allow me, I'll throw it out there. And it's the letter O, Dark, DARK, 3030.com. We've got some things on there right now just for brand recognition, but we're getting ready to do a full launch at the end of the year. Boots, pants, tactical pants, shirts, jackets, hats, you name it, we got it. And it's just been, I know nothing. And thank God my wife is in the business and has her contacts. But everybody I talk to across the globe is like, hey, when you getting these boots in? When you getting this jacket? When blah, blah, blah. So, we're getting a little excited about it. But, so I'm giving Calvin Klein a run for his money, too.
There you go. The hour's flown by, man. It doesn't even feel like it's been an hour.
It's been an hour? Good Lord.
Yeah, already.
I've been rattling, Mike. I apologize.
No, I want that. I always say to my guests, if I'm doing a lot of the talking during an episode, it's a bad sign. I like my guests to be talkers, so I appreciate it. And that it's now time to end as we always end, of course, and that's with the rapid fire. You can say pass if you want, but it is 5 hit-run questions from me, 5 hit-run answers from me. Are you ready?
Okay, let's try it.
All right, first, and this is why you can say pass. Funniest colleagues you ever worked with?
Tommy Kilbride, also known as the Marine. He was on the Manhunter show with me. I laughed with that guy every single day. He was the best. He was an ICE supervisor, immigration supervisor.
And there's a lot of, this is the second one, there's a lot of rewarding outcomes. You had a lot of rewarding cases, but is there a particularly rewarding case that comes to mind?
I think I still hold the record for arresting 3 top 15 U.S. Marshal fugitives over the years. In the 90s, I arrested a guy who was the hashish marijuana guy in New York City in the 1980s. I won't get into detail, but and of course, I was involved with the D.C. sniper case, the Boston bomber. I mean, it's endless, but that's for some reason that sticks with me. Third, favorite cop show or cop movie? The one I was in. You probably don't even know this. I'm going to say Beretta. When I was a kid, you're probably not even aware of the show, but Beretta was he was my hero. I loved that cop show. Kojak, those old school Barney Miller type of cop shows I like.
Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Oh, my friend owns a place called Promola's. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's on 2nd Avenue between 64th and 65th Street. Best Italian food in the city. Been there 36 years now.
Well, there you go. All right. I'll have to check it out next time I'm down in the city.
Yeah.
Fifth and finally, it doesn't matter if they're coming into local law enforcement or federal. Given your experiences, what advice would you give someone coming into law enforcement? You know what?
I would tip my hat to any woman, any guy, anybody that wants to jump on board a law enforcement career. I mean, it's a tough career, especially now. It's going to get better. But right now, as a young person in college, my daughter actually is majoring in criminal justice and minoring in cyber technology and whatnot. But there's so much that goes on within law enforcement and different agencies and forensics and whatever you're into. But I keep yourself clean. Obviously, stay in shape because these boot camps, these training camps are tough on the federal side. And don't drink too much.
Right. Be sharp of mind and be sharp of body, of course.
Correct.
Those are the key aspects, of course, in any success, or to have success in any job, I should say, but especially a job and a career as demanding as law enforcement. So like I said, this has been great. Stick around. We'll say goodbye off the air. Before I say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything that you want to give?
No, other than George Orwell, who once said people sleep peaceably in their beds at night because rough men and women do harm on their behalf. These are the men and women that are keeping our streets safe. So God bless them all.
There you go. I appreciate that. And again, like I said, stick around. We'll say goodbye off the air. Thanks to everybody that tuned in tonight. I appreciate it. Of course, always good to see you guys popping up in the chat, supporting the show. Coming up next in the Mike Dunleavy podcast, he was a sergeant, of course, finished out as a sergeant, I should say. Before that, had some interesting commands, worked in particular in the 32nd Precinct in Harlem, which is one of the more violent precincts in the city. He'll join me Friday to talk about it. I'm working to confirm it. Mark Mulitz will be here, so that should be a good show with Mark. And then next Tuesday should be another volume of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's bomb squad with retired NYPD bomb squad detective Walter Breslin, who worked in the bomb squad during the 80s when they were really busy with domestic terrorist groups. So that should be a couple of interesting shows on tap. In the meantime, on behalf of retired U.S. Marshal Lenny DePaul, I am Mike Colon, and we will see you next time. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in.
Thank you.